Bill Gates. You know the name. For decades, he was the tech genius, right? The guy who put a computer in every home. But now, for a lot of people, he's one of the most controversial, maybe even disliked figures on the entire planet. So today, we're going to dig into that. How on earth did we get from there to here?
So what happened? On the surface, the story seems perfect, doesn't it? A tech revolutionary who becomes a global philanthropist, fighting disease and climate change. But the source material we're looking at today says this image is no accident. It claims Gates has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into crafting it. And now, some serious cracks are starting to appear in that polished facade.
Visionary or monopolist? Philanthropist or megalomaniac? These are the labels that really get to the heart of the Bill Gates paradox. To understand why so many people have turned against him, we have to go back, way back. We need to see how the man and the myth were built in the first place. To really get a handle on the kind of power Bill Gates has today, you have to look at the world he came from. A world where, according to the source, success wasn't just possible, it was practically guaranteed.
Just take a look at this family tree for a second. This isn't just a list of relatives, it's a map of American power. His grandfather, president of a major bank and a director at the Federal Reserve. His mother, a huge player at United Way, deciding where millions in charity money went. His father, a celebrated philanthropist, rubbing shoulders with the Rockefellers. The point is, this wasn't just some smart kid in a garage. He was born into a dynasty.
And to be clear, he was brilliant in his own right. By 13, he's writing software. As a teenager, he gets caught exploiting computer bugs for free time, and what happens? The company hires him to find more bugs for them. It was an early sign of a pattern we'd see again and again. Break the rules and get rewarded for it. All of this, of course, leads to 1975, when he drops out of Harvard to start Microsoft.
So Microsoft is born. And this next phase, it wasn't just about innovation, it was about total domination. Let's break down how this small software company grew into a global empire that changed everything. The source lays out this really clear four-step path to power. First, they land a huge contract with IBM, which it's claimed his mother's connections helped secure. Then comes MS-DOS, which becomes the standard. And then the absolute game changer, Windows, the operating system that would basically define computing for an entire generation.
And this chart, wow, this just puts that explosion into perspective. Look at this. Windows 3.1 sold 3 million copies in its first 2 months. That's incredible, right? But then, just a few years later, Windows 95 sells 1 million copies in its first 4 days. This wasn't just a product launch, it was a conquest. Microsoft became unavoidable.
But behind all that success, things were getting pretty ugly. This quote comes from the perspective of his co-founder, Paul Allen. When Allen got sick with lymphoma and had to step back, he claimed he discovered that Gates was, in his words, scheming to rip him off. He called it mercenary opportunism. It's a pretty brutal look at the ambition that was driving this company. Well, eventually, that relentless push for dominance got the attention of the U.S. government. In 1998, Microsoft got hit with a massive antitrust lawsuit. They were accused of being an illegal monopoly that was just crushing all of its competition. This was a huge turning point, not just for the company, but for Bill Gates' public image. Okay, so after the lawsuits and the whole dot-com bubble burst, Gates' reputation was seriously tarnished. So the source argues he started one of the biggest rebranding campaigns in history. He pivoted hard from tech mogul to global philanthropist. And a huge piece of the strategy, according to the source, was about money and media. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has reportedly funneled over $320 million to media outlets and journalism organizations. The source suggests this kind of money creates a media landscape that's, well, very friendly to Bill Gates, helping to shape that public story. And that influence isn't just in the news you read, it's global. Check out this chart. It shows the top contributors to the World Health Organization. And yep, you see it right there. The Gates Foundation is a top donor, giving more than most countries. The source argues this is basically a form of privatization, giving one man and his foundation a massive say in global health policy. All right, so that brings us pretty much up to today, where Gates' incredible influence is facing a whole new level of very intense scrutiny. So get this. Did you have any idea that Bill Gates is the largest private owner of farmland in the United States? It's true, over 269,000 acres. The source we're looking at claims these purchases were made quietly, during the pandemic, using a whole web of shell companies to hide who was actually buying it all up. So the big question is, why? Why buy all that farmland? Well, the public story from Gates is that it's just a good investment. But the source material suggests a different theory, that it's actually a strategic play to centralize power over our food supply and, not so coincidentally, promote his own massive investments in synthetic meat companies. And then, there's the connection to Jeffrey Epstein. The timeline here is absolutely critical. Epstein was convicted as a sex offender back in 2008. The source says Bill Gates started meeting with him in 2011 after that conviction, and that dozens of meetings reportedly happened over the years. And this association reportedly had devastating personal consequences. This quote is from his now ex-wife, Melinda French Gates. She apparently hired divorce lawyers right around the time these meetings became public knowledge, saying she was disgusted by it and had made her feelings very clear to him. So how did Gates himself respond when the tough questions started coming? When he was pressed about it in a PBS interview, he gave this very strange, now infamous answer. Well, he's dead, so you always have to be careful. It's a comment that has left a lot of people scratching their heads. So, where does this lifelong quest for power and control go from here? The source argues that it's heading toward a new battlefield, the metaverse, and maybe the nature of reality itself. You know, when we hear metaverse, we think of meta, right? Facebook, social stuff, gaming. But Microsoft is playing a completely different game. They're focused on the professional world, building the metaverse directly into Microsoft Teams. The source actually calls this the company's lifeline, their way of guaranteeing they dominate the next generation of how we work and live.
And at the end of the day, this isn't just about cool new tech. The source concludes that the ultimate goal here is the same one that's driven Microsoft from the very beginning: to build the next monopoly. Just like they cornered the market on the desktop with Windows, the new goal is to corner the market on the virtual world itself.
Which leaves all of us with one last, pretty unsettling question to chew on. From computer software to global health, from our food supply to virtual space, the pattern seems to be about consolidation and control. So as we stand here on the edge of this new digital frontier, you have to ask yourself, is the next monopoly reality itself?